I heard them whispering my name in the darkness, multiple voices, circling my campfire. But when the sun came up, I understood why they'd been watching me all night, and why I was never supposed to leave those woods alive. I'd been camping for nearly a decade, visiting remote spots across the American West that most people had never heard of. So when I planned a solo 6-day trip to a backcountry area in southern Colorado, I wasn't nervous. I was excited. The trailhead was unmarked, tucked behind an abandoned ranger station about 40 miles from the nearest town. The Forest Service had decommissioned this section years ago due to budget cuts, but the trails were still there, overgrown, quiet, and completely isolated. Exactly what I was looking for. The first 3 days were perfect. I set up camp near a dried creek bed, surrounded by towering ponderosa pines that blocked out most of the sunlight. The air smelled like sage and earth. I spent my time reading, cooking simple meals over my propane stove, and exploring the area. I didn't see another soul, no hikers, no campers. Not even fresh tire tracks at the trailhead when I'd arrived. It was just me and the forest. By the third evening, I'd settled into a comfortable rhythm. I built a small fire as the sun dipped below the ridgeline, then settled into my camp chair with a book, planning to read until the stars came out. That's when everything changed. The sound cut through the silence like a knife, a scream, not an animal, not a bird, a human scream, raw, desperate, and filled with terror. It echoed through the trees from somewhere to the north, maybe a quarter mile away, near where I knew there was a small pond. My book fell from my hands. Every muscle in my body locked up as I strained to listen. Then, nothing, complete silence. Even the usual night sounds, crickets, wind rustling through branches, seemed to have stopped. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, heart hammering, staring into the darkness beyond my fire's glow. The smart part of my brain tried to rationalize it. Mountain lions can make sounds that mimic human screams. Foxes too, sometimes. But I'd heard those sounds before on previous trips. This was different. This sounded like words, like someone screaming for help. But then, why only once? Why not call out again? I barely slept that night. Every snap of a twig, every gust of wind made me bolt upright in my sleeping bag. I kept my knife unsheathed next to me and my flashlight in hand. When dawn finally broke, I felt foolish. The forest looked completely ordinary in the morning light, peaceful, even. I made coffee and tried to convince myself I'd overreacted, but curiosity gnawed at me. I needed to know what had made that sound. Around mid-morning, I decided to hike to the pond. It was only about 20 minutes through the trees, following a faint game trail I'd noticed on my second day. I told myself I'd just take a quick look, maybe find some animal tracks, then head back. I smelled it before I saw it. Something wrong, something rotten. The pond was smaller than I remembered, more of a large puddle really, surrounded by exposed mud and sandy soil. And there, on the far side, the ground had been disturbed, badly. Long drag marks carved through the mud, leading directly into the murky water. Scattered around the drag marks were personal items. A crushed water bottle, a torn jacket, a single hiking boot, scattered granola bar wrappers. But what made my blood run cold were the symbols. Carved into the mud in several places were crude markings, circles with lines through them, symbols I didn't recognize. They looked deliberate, purposeful, like someone had used a stick to scratch them into the soft ground. My hands started shaking. This wasn't a mountain lion, this was human. I backed away slowly, my eyes scanning the tree line. Suddenly the forest felt hostile. The trees seemed to lean inward, the shadows looked deeper. I practically ran back to my campsite, crashing through underbrush, not caring about the noise. When I finally reached my tent, I stood there gasping, trying to decide what to do. Pack up and leave? It was only 11 a.m. I could be back at my car by mid-afternoon, back to civilization by evening. But something stopped me, pride maybe, or stubbornness. I'd paid for 6 days. I'd driven 8 hours to get here, and what had I actually seen? Some drag marks and trash. Could have been there for weeks, months even. I decided to stay one more night. If anything else weird happened, I'd leave at first light. God, I was an idiot. I started my campfire earlier than usual, while there was still some daylight left. I wanted it roaring before dark, wanted that circle of light as large as possible. As twilight settled in, I sat close to the flames, my knife on my lap, flashlight at my feet. The forest grew dark. And quiet. Too quiet. That's when I heard the whisper. Over there I froze. It came from the darkness to my left, just beyond the reach of my firelight. A voice. Definitely a voice. Male. Quiet but clear. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the sound. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but trees and shadows. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. Is someone there? Silence. Then, from a completely different direction to my right this time, another whisper. He heard us! My stomach dropped. My flashlight swung wildly right, then left, then behind me. Multiple voices meant multiple people, and they were surrounding me. Who's there? I shouted. What do you want? A third voice, this one behind me, closer than the others. Just wait. I spun around so fast I almost fell into my fire. I started feeding it every piece of wood I had nearby, making it bigger, brighter. Light meant safety. Light meant I could see them coming. But I was running out of firewood. I had to venture out to collect more wood. I had no choice. If the fire died, I'd be completely exposed in the darkness. With my flashlight in one hand and my knife in the other, I stepped beyond my circle of safety. I worked fast, grabbing dry branches from the ground, snapping twigs off low-hanging limbs. That's when I heard it. Multiple sets of footsteps, crunching through the underbrush, moving in a circle around my camp. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. And then the whispers became clearer. Michael, my name. They were saying my name. Michael, we've been waiting. I ran back to the fire, arms full of wood, dumping it all in a pile. I fed the flames frantically, making them leap higher. The footsteps continued circling, just out of sight. This happened 4 more times throughout the night. Each time I went for wood, I'd hear them. Whispers, footsteps, sometimes soft laughter. But I never saw anyone. The voices knew things, my name, that I was alone, how long I'd been there. They'd been watching me for days. When the first hint of gray light appeared on the horizon, the voices stopped. The footsteps ceased. I didn't wait for full sunrise. The moment I could see the trail, I started packing. I threw everything into my backpack with shaking hands, didn't bother organizing, didn't bother with my tent. I just grabbed my essentials and ran. The trail felt different, wrong. I noticed things I hadn't seen before. Broken branches arranged in patterns, more of those carved symbols in tree bark. And deep in the woods, parallel to the trail, I could see boot prints. Multiple sets, fresh. They'd been following me all along. I made it to my car in record time, threw my pack in the back, and drove. I didn't stop until I hit the highway, and even then, I kept checking my rearview mirror. That was 4 months ago. I reported what happened to the local sheriff's department, but they weren't interested. No body, no crime. They said the area was known for squatters and suggested I'd probably just encountered some homeless people trying to scare me off. But here's the thing they couldn't explain. Last week, I got a package at my apartment, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, taken at night using a flash. It showed me. Sitting at my campfire on that 4th night, face illuminated by the flames, and behind me, barely visible in the darkness, were 4 figures, standing in a half circle, watching. On the back of the photo, written in careful handwriting, "Come back, Michael. We're still waiting." When I turned around for the last time, all 3 men were gone from the campfire, but I could hear footsteps in the darkness behind me, running, and I was still 2 miles from my car. I'd been camping my entire adult life, but always at established campgrounds, the kind with designated spots, fire rings, and bathrooms. Places where families set up elaborate sites with lanterns and folding tables, where you could hear neighboring conversations and feel safe in numbers. But last spring, I decided it was time to level up. I wanted solitude. I wanted to experience real wilderness camping. Just me, a tent, and miles of forest. I found a trail online that led to a backcountry camping area in the Cascade foothills. The reviews were sparse, just a few comments about peaceful and rarely crowded. The trail was listed as 2.3 miles one way, moderate difficulty, with primitive camping at the end. Perfect for a beginner like me. I should have questioned why there were so few recent reviews. I arrived at the trailhead around 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning. The parking area wasn't really a parking lot at all, just a widened shoulder of gravel off a Forest Service road. My car was the only vehicle there. I checked my pack one more time: tent, sleeping bag, food, water filter, first aid kit. Everything I needed for 2 nights alone in the woods. I felt a mix of nervousness and excitement as I locked my car and started up the trail. The forest was beautiful. Towering Douglas firs filtered the sunlight into golden beams. The air smelled like pine needles and damp earth. Birds called from the canopy. For the first 30 minutes, I was completely alone with my thoughts, enjoying the rhythm of my boots on the packed dirt trail. Then I saw him. A figure ahead of me on the trail, moving slowly through a patch of sunlight. A man, maybe in his 40s, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, no backpack, no hiking poles, just walking. But he was moving at an almost comical pace, like slow motion. Each step seemed deliberate, measured, as if he was counting them. I'm not usually one to pass people on trails. I prefer to hang back, let them get ahead, enjoy the solitude. But this guy was moving so incredibly slowly that I would have had to stop completely and wait 15 minutes to let him gain any distance. So I decided to pass him. "Excuse me," I called out as I approached. "Just coming around on your left." He didn't respond, didn't even turn his head. I moved to the side of the trail to go around him. The moment I drew even with him, he suddenly matched my pace, speeding up from his crawl to a perfectly normal walking speed, as if he'd been moving that way all along. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" he said, his voice friendly and warm. I jumped a little, startled by the sudden conversation. "Oh yeah, it really is." He extended his hand toward me without breaking stride. "I'm Derek." I shook his hand automatically, still processing the weirdness of the situation. "I'm Sarah." "First time out here?" he asked. "Yeah, actually. First time doing backcountry camping. Usually I stick to the campgrounds with the RVs and families, you know?" Derek smiled. "This is the perfect place to start then. Real quiet. I've been coming here for years. Actually, I'm already set up, just taking a morning walk to stretch my legs." "Oh, you don't have your pack with you," I observed. "No need. My camp's just past the official camping area, tucked back in the trees a bit, more private that way." He glanced over at me. "Hey, if you want, you should swing by later. I'll have a fire going, make some dinner. Nice to have company out here." Looking back, I should have recognized the red flags, the impossibly slow walking, the perfectly timed conversation starter, the immediate friendliness, the invitation to a campsite tucked back in the trees. But Derek seemed genuinely nice, normal. He talked about his job as an accountant, complained about Seattle traffic, recommended other trails in the area. We chatted easily for the next 40 minutes as we hiked together. When we reached the designated camping area, a small clearing with a couple of fire rings and flat spots for tents, I started unloading my pack. "My site's about 10 minutes that way," Derek said, gesturing toward a barely visible path leading deeper into the forest. "Come find me once you're settled, around sunset. We'll cook something good." "Sounds great," I said, still believing everything was fine. He disappeared into the trees, and I was alone. I spent the afternoon setting up my tent, organizing my gear, and exploring the immediate area. The camping spot was nice, quiet, surrounded by ferns and moss-covered logs. I could hear a creek babbling somewhere nearby, but I never saw another soul. No other hikers came up the trail. No one else was camping in the clearing. It was just me, exactly like I'd wanted. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky orange and pink through the trees, I started to feel that first tickle of unease. Something about Derek's invitation felt off. Why had he never mentioned having friends with him? Was he really alone out there? But I'd already agreed to go, and I didn't want to seem paranoid or rude. When dusk settled over the forest, Derek emerged from the trees near my tent, making me jump. "Ready?" he asked with that same friendly smile. I nodded, grabbed my headlamp just in case, and followed him into the darkening woods. We walked much farther than 10 minutes. The trail, if you could call it that, wound deeper and deeper into the forest, away from any marked paths. Branches scraped my arms, roots caught my boots. I kept losing sight of Derek's back in the shadows. "How much farther?" I called out. "Just up ahead. See the light?" I could just barely make out a flickering glow through the dense trees. A campfire. We stepped into a small clearing, and my stomach dropped. Two other men sat on logs around the fire. Both looked to be in their 30s or 40s. Both turned to stare at me as I entered the clearing. Neither smiled. Derek had never mentioned them. Not once during our entire conversation on the trail. "Guys, this is Sarah," Derek said casually, as if this wasn't completely bizarre. "Sarah, this is Mark and Joel." Mark nodded. Joel just stared. I stood there awkwardly, my mind racing. Should I leave? Make an excuse? But I was already here, deep in the woods with three strange men, and leaving abruptly would make everything uncomfortable. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Derek just forgot to mention his friends. I sat down on an empty log. Derek knelt by the fire, arranging a pot of water over the flames. "Just making some ramen," he said. "Nothing fancy, but it hits the spot out here." "Cool," I managed. The other two men said nothing. They just watched me with blank expressions. The forest around us had gone completely silent. No birds, no wind, no rustling leaves. Just the crackle of the fire. I tried to make conversation. "So, do you guys come out here together often?" No response. Mark looked at Joel. Joel looked at Derek. Derek kept stirring the pot. The silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. Every time I glanced up, I caught one of them staring at me, only to have them quickly look away. My skin began to crawl. "Hey, actually," I said, standing up as casually as I could manage. I think I left my water bottle back at my tent. I'm gonna run grab it real quick. Save me some of that ramen, though. I'll be right back. Derek didn't look up from the pot. Sure. I turned and started walking back the way we'd come, forcing myself not to run. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I'd taken maybe 5 steps when I heard movement behind me. I glanced over my shoulder. Mark and Joel were standing now, watching me walk away. Their postures had changed, tense, predatory. Derek was still crouched by the fire, but his head was turned toward me now, his friendly expression completely gone. I kept walking, faster now. When I'd put about 50 feet between us and could barely see the campfire through the trees, that horrible feeling of being watched became unbearable. I turned around one more time. All 3 men were gone. The logs they'd been sitting on were empty. The clearing was deserted except for the fire still burning. I ran. I crashed through the forest, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I didn't know if I was going the right direction. I couldn't see the trail, but I could hear them behind me now. Footsteps, multiple sets, breaking through the underbrush. They weren't calling out to me, weren't asking where I was going, they were just following. By some miracle, I found the main trail. I recognized a distinctive fallen tree I'd passed earlier. My tent was in the clearing ahead, barely visible in the twilight. I didn't stop. I didn't pack my gear. I grabbed my car keys from the tent pocket where I'd stashed them and ran straight down the trail toward the parking area. The 2 miles back felt like 20. I used my headlamp, gasping for air, my legs burning. Every shadow looked like a person. Every sound was footsteps closing in. When I finally burst out onto the Forest Service road and saw my car sitting alone in the gravel pullout, I nearly cried with relief. I dove inside, locked the doors, and called 911 as I sped away. 2 sheriff's deputies met me at a gas station 15 miles down the road. I told them everything: the slow walk, the invitation, the 2 other men, the way they all vanished, the chase through the woods. The deputies drove back to the trailhead. They confirmed what I already knew. No other vehicles were parked there. No cars anywhere on the Forest Service road for miles. Those men had been in the woods for maybe weeks, waiting. The deputies hiked in the next morning with a search team. They found my tent still set up untouched. They found the designated camping area, but they never found Derek's campsite. No fire ring. No evidence anyone had been camping back in those trees at all. 2 months later, I got a Facebook friend request from someone named Derek Paulson. No profile picture, no mutual friends. One photo on the account, a picture of a forest trail, my forest trail. The caption read, "Great hiking partner. Let's do it again sometime." When my dog's collar came back without my dog still in it, I knew something in those woods had taken her. But when I finally found her, shaking, terrified, unable to move, I realized whatever grabbed her had let her go on purpose, and it was waiting for me to come back to camp. This happened in the fall of 2016. I had a 3-year-old border collie mix named Bailey, one of those dogs that was pure energy, always ready for the next adventure. We'd been camping together since she was a puppy, visiting sites all over Oregon and Washington. This particular weekend, I wasn't planning anything ambitious. Just a quick overnight trip to a state forest about 90 minutes from my apartment, a place Bailey and I had visited at least a dozen times before. It was our go-to spot when I needed to decompress. Familiar trails, easy access, and usually quiet enough that Bailey could run off leash without bothering anyone. We arrived around noon on a Saturday. The parking area was empty, which wasn't unusual for this time of year. Most casual campers had packed it in for the season, and the serious backpackers were heading to higher elevations. Perfect. I set up my tent in our usual spot, a small clearing about a quarter mile from the trailhead, surrounded by dense Douglas firs. The moment I unclipped Bailey's leash, I knew something was off. Normally, she'd immediately start exploring, sniffing every tree, chasing squirrels, splashing in the nearby creek. Instead, she stayed glued to my side, ears pinned back, hackles slightly raised. "What's wrong, girl?" I asked, scratching behind her ears. She wouldn't move. Just kept staring into the tree line, body tense, occasionally letting out a low whine. I followed her gaze but saw nothing. The forest was completely still. No birds chirping, no squirrels rustling through leaves, no wind moving through the branches, just silence. I walked the perimeter of our camp, checking for signs of bears or mountain lions. Nothing. No scat, no tracks, no claw marks on trees. After about 20 minutes, Bailey finally seemed to relax. Her tail started wagging again, and she trotted off to investigate a fallen log. I convinced myself she'd probably just smelled a deer or heard something I couldn't. Dogs have senses we don't. Maybe she was picking up on some predator that had passed through hours earlier. We spent the afternoon doing our usual camping routine. I set up my hammock and read while Bailey explored the area, never wandering too far. Every 15 minutes or so, she'd circle back to check on me, then head off again. Around 4:30, I started gathering firewood. The sun was getting lower and the temperature was dropping fast. I wanted a good fire going before dark. Bailey helped in her own way, finding sticks that were way too big to burn and proudly bringing them to me like she'd discovered treasure. I laughed and threw them for her a few times, enjoying the normalcy of it. By 5:45, I had a decent fire crackling. I made dinner, just instant ramen and a granola bar, and shared some of the noodles with Bailey. She curled up next to me, and we both watched the flames as twilight settled over the forest. That's when I heard it. A stick snapped, loud, close. I looked up, squinting into the growing darkness beyond the fire's glow. For just a second, maybe less, I saw something move between the trees. A shadow, human-sized, but the way it moved was wrong. Too quick, too smooth. Before I could even process what I'd seen, Bailey exploded. She went from calm to absolute fury in a heartbeat, barking and snarling like I'd never heard before. Then she bolted straight toward the trees, ignoring my shouts. Bailey! No! Bailey, come! She didn't even hesitate, just vanished into the darkness, her barks echoing back to me as she crashed through the underbrush. I grabbed my flashlight and ran after her, my heart hammering. The forest had been quiet all day, and now I could barely hear my own thoughts over Bailey's aggressive barking and the sound of my boots pounding against the trail. But she was fast. So fast. Within 30 seconds, I'd lost sight of her. Within a minute, her barks started to fade. I kept running, sweeping my flashlight back and forth, calling her name until my throat was raw. Then suddenly, silence, complete total silence. Bailey! Nothing, not a bark, not a rustle, nothing. Panic set in, real cold panic. Bailey had chased deer before, raccoons, even a black bear once. But she always came back within minutes, tongue hanging out, looking proud of herself. She'd never just disappeared. I kept searching, pushing deeper into the woods than I'd ever gone from this campsite. The trees seemed to close in around me. My flashlight beam felt pathetically small against the vast darkness. After 45 minutes, I made myself stop. I was getting disoriented. If I went much farther, I wouldn't be able to find my way back to camp. And if Bailey was going to return, that's where she'd go. I jogged back, checking over my shoulder every few seconds, half hoping, half dreading that I'd see something following me. When I reached camp, Bailey wasn't there. I grabbed my headlamp, a second flashlight, and headed back out. This time, I stayed methodical, walking in expanding circles from the campsite, calling her name, stopping every few minutes to listen. That's when I found the collar. It was lying in a patch of dead leaves about half a mile from camp, the metal buckle twisted and broken. Not worn through, not unfastened. Broken, like something had ripped it off with tremendous force. My hands started shaking. I picked it up, and Bailey's tags jingled in the silence. Bailey? My voice came out as a whisper. I swept my light in a slow circle, and that's when I saw her. She was maybe 20 feet away, lying on her side near the base of a massive fir tree, not moving. I ran to her, dropping to my knees. Bailey! Oh God, Bailey. She was alive, breathing. But she wouldn't respond. Her eyes were open, but she just stared straight ahead, her whole body trembling violently. There was no blood. No visible injuries. But something was wrong. I ran my hands over her, checking for broken bones or wounds. Nothing. Come on, girl. Come on, we're leaving. We're going home. She wouldn't stand. Wouldn't even try. I had to pick her up, all 60 pounds of her, and carry her in my arms. After about 10 minutes, she finally seemed to snap out of whatever shock she was in and started walking on her own, pressing close against my legs. When we got within sight of the campsite, I stopped dead. The tent was shredded. Not just knocked over, shredded. Long tears ran through the nylon from top to bottom, like something with claws had methodically ripped it apart. My backpack had been dumped out, contents scattered everywhere. Food packages torn open. Clothing strewn across the clearing. My sleeping bag pulled from the tent and dragged halfway to the tree line. But here's what made my blood run cold. My gear wasn't just scattered randomly, it was arranged. My clothes were laid out in a line leading away from the fire. My food wrappers were stacked in a small pyramid. My boots, which I'd left inside the tent, were placed neatly side by side in the center of the clearing. Someone had done this. Someone had gone through my things while I was out looking for Bailey, and they'd done it carefully. Bailey pressed against my leg, a low growl rumbling in her chest. She was staring past the campfire into the darkness beyond. I didn't wait to see what she was looking at. I grabbed what I could in about 20 seconds. Phone, keys, wallet, water bottle. Left everything else. The tent, the sleeping bag, half my clothes. Didn't matter. We were leaving, now. The hike back to my truck usually took about 20 minutes. I made it in 12, half running, Bailey keeping pace beside me, both of us glancing back every few seconds. When we reached the parking area, I'd never been so relieved to see my beat-up Subaru. I threw my stuff in the back, lifted Bailey into the passenger seat, and got the hell out of there. I didn't stop shaking until we hit the main highway. Bailey recovered physically within a few days. But she was never quite the same. She started having nightmares, whimpering and thrashing in her sleep. She became terrified of the dark and refused to go outside after sunset. And she never wanted to go camping again. Even pulling out my backpack would send her into a panic. I told myself we'd been victims of some aggressive wildlife. A bear, maybe, or a mountain lion that had stalked us. But bears don't arrange your clothes in lines. Mountain lions don't stack your garbage in pyramids. Bailey died 2 years ago, cancer. After she passed, I decided to go back to that campsite one last time. I don't know why. Closure, maybe. Or some misguided idea that I could finally understand what happened that night. The clearing was still there, same fire ring, same fallen log where I'd sat, but carved into the bark of the tree where I'd found Bailey, carved deep and deliberate, were 3 words. She came back underneath, scratched in smaller letters. Will you? I hiked back to my truck and haven't been camping since.